Hello everyone, thanks for joining me. Today I'm doing 10 cards, 1 kit with My Monthly Hero August 2018 card kit. We're going to jump in and get started with our first card. I'm taking a piece of white cardstock here and we're going to do some stamping. I'm going to stamp the fancy coffee cup and then also the smaller coffee mug. There's a little straw in there, but I'm going to actually make that into a cookie. So one of those little rolled wafer cookies. So I'm going to stamp that along with the whipped cream. I'm using my Memento Tuxedo Black ink. I'm actually going to color in my images with my Copic markers, and since the video did run a little bit long, I'm going to go ahead and color them in and then use the coordinating dies to cut out my images. This month kit is all about coffee, and I love my coffee, so I had so much fun playing with it. Okay, images are colored in. I'm going to set those aside. I did tape 2 of my little cookie straws together, and I also secured my whipped cream to a piece of white cardstock. I really wanted to use the lacquer pen and then the white puff embossing powder. I was so excited to try this out, but I added the lacquer pen to my whipped topping here. I'm going to take my white puff embossing powder, go over the top, and then I'm going to go ahead and use my heat gun to melt that. As I got ready to heat it up, I thought, you know what, I better tuck my little cookies inside my whipped topping. I knew that the white puff is going to cause a lot of dimension, and so I added my little cookies to my whipped cream, and then I'm going to go over the bottom portion of them with the lacquer pen, and then I'll add a little bit more of the white puff embossing powder. This way it'll help secure them too to the whipped topping, and it'll actually really look like they're going to stick out of there. Okay, I went ahead and melted it, and I wanted to show you a close-up of what it looked like. This stuff is so fun. I fell in love with my I just used it recently in a video, but it was my snow pen. This stuff I think is better than the snow pen because it's more controllable, but I really like the way this turned out. Love this stuff. Oh, and kits are still available, guys, if you're interested. I'll leave links below in the description area, which is a shocker because usually they sell out pretty quick. But okay, for my background, I grabbed a stencil from my stash, and I'm going to create like a brick background. So I'm grabbing some Distress Oxide inks. I'm going to start off with some Vintage Photo, and I wanted some white areas, so I'm just kind of doing like a S shape. After I have the Vintage Photo down, I'm going to go in with some Candied Apple, and then I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of Fossilized Amber, just to add some yellow tones in there. Kind of creates a real fun background. Okay, there we go. Now I'm going to grab a circle die, and I'm going to cut out a half circle, a little bit more than a half circle on my panel here. I'm going to flip it around, and then I'll add cut out a circle right there. Now I also grabbed a piece of like dark chocolate brown cardstock that I had in my stash, and I created a background panel for that. Now the size of my panel that has the bricks on it, in case you want to know, it's 3.5 inches by 4 3/4. But now we're going to go ahead and stamp our sentiment. Sentiment I chose says, "Sending you a latte love." I'm going to ink up my stamp with some Versamark ink, and I'm going to stamp it on some black cardstock. I'm going to grab some white embossing powder. We'll just cover that, and then using my heat gun, I'm going to melt it. I did trim it down and block it off. Okay, now we're going to get all of our elements together. I'm going to go ahead and add some foam tape behind my brick panel, and then we'll place that on the dark brown panel right behind it. I'm going to go ahead and arrange my little fancy coffees. I love fancy coffees. Fancy coffees are like my winter time theme. I love fancy coffees in the winter. Even actually right now I think the pumpkin spice lattes are out, and I so look forward to that. But anyway, just to add a little love, I'm taking the little heart that's in the stamp set, and I'm going to stamp 3 hearts. And then I decided to take my black marker or Copic marker. I'm just going to fill in those hearts, so they're just little black hearts. Now technically this part should be done after you adhere it to your card base, because after I filled in my hearts, I'm going to go over them with my lacquer pen. And so it should have been done first, that way I could just open the card and I'm done. But I'm going to go ahead and use my tape runner directly on my card base, and then I'll place my panel, kind of pressing around the areas that don't have the whipped cream or the lacquer pen. But that finishes off card number 1. Here's a close-up. Okay, moving along, card number 2. We're going to do a little bit more stamping. So in the stamp set, there's a to-go coffee cup. I'm going to actually stamp that 3 times on a piece of white cardstock. Now I did grab the lid. For the lid, I'm actually going to stamp on some craft cardstock. For the sentiment, I chose the one that says Espresso Yourself, and I'm going to stamp the sentiment on each one of those cups. A little bit towards the top, and then I did color them in with my Copic markers and then used the coordinating dies to cut those out. I did just a very minimal shading on those. I wanted them to be mostly white. But now I'm going to stamp the lid on craft cardstock. This is Nina 100 pound, Nina Desert Storm 100 pound craft cardstock. But I did cut them out first and then colored them, added just a little bit of shading. Okay, now only one of the coffee cups I filled in with coffee. I'm actually going to use my glue to attach the lids to these 2 cups. And then the third one, we're going to go ahead and add foam squares behind here too. But the third one, we're not going to do that too. I wasn't sure if I wanted to add foam squares behind there and pop it up or not. So we'll just get these ready. Okay, now in this month's kit, there was some beautiful specialty paper. This is so neat. It's coffee and tea. Coffee and tea dyed paper. It's so pretty. But I used a scalloped rectangle die and I cut out my panel here. For my card base for this card, it's going to be a side folding A2 size card base. And so I used the same chocolate brown that I used to back my first card up. Placed that in the center just using my tape runner. And then I decided to add a little bit of this pattern paper. It's from my favorite themes, Stripes. I'll leave a link below for this pattern paper, but I use it quite often in each one of my cards. But I just added a small thin strip, and I'm going to place it on the very bottom of this card base, and then I did pop it up with foam squares. Now I'm just going to arrange my little coffee cups. I kind of want them in a little cluster, and then I'll place my lid at the very bottom of the one that we didn't add foam tape to. But for a little bit of sparkle, I went in with some iridescent sequins and placed them all around my card base. And then that is it for that card. Okay, card number 3, I wanted to use this beautiful frame die. And so I'm going to take a piece of white cardstock and then also a stitched rectangle die and cut out my panel. Now I also cut out a panel with that window die with black cardstock. And again, to save time, I used my Copic markers to color it in, which was so fun to color. I really enjoyed coloring this one in. Okay, now I wanted that valance area of the little coffee shop to be black and white. So I'm just taking a strip of black cardstock. I trimmed it down and I'm going to place that right behind my valance on the back side. And then when you flip it over, it's going to create real fun black and white valance. Okay, now for the black one that I die cut out, I'm just going to use that center piece here. I wanted this to be like a chalkboard in the background, so that's where we're going to do our stamping. For my sentiment for this card, I chose Life Begins After Coffee, and I used my anti-static powder tool and went over the black cardstock, and then I'll go ahead and stamp my sentiment with Versamark ink. And to save time, I went ahead and heat embossed it with white embossing powder. Okay, lovely. Now, I'm going to go ahead and it's kind of like a piecing a puzzle. So I'm going to go ahead and place this back in my window frame, and then I'll flip this panel over, and I'll go ahead and use Scotch tape to secure it behind. Now there was like 3 extra little itty bitty pieces, and so I made sure to cover those areas with Scotch tape. That way when you flip it to the right side, that sticky will be there, and all I have to do is paper piece back in there. So that panel's all done. I decided to take, these are little heart brads. I think I got this little pack from Michael's a long time ago, but it has a silver outline and then a pearl heart in the middle. I thought that would look really fun on that little sign. So I added that, and then I'll go ahead and add foam tape behind this entire panel. I did use another piece of the coffee and tea dyed specialty paper that came with this month's kit. I just cut out a panel that was the same size as my frame, placed that on my card base, and then we're going to place that right on top. That way my background has a little bit of texture in the back. But that's it for that card. I think it turned out really fun, and I love that little scene. Here's a close-up. Okay, moving on to our next card, card number 4. I already colored in 2 of the coffee cups here, one pink and then one yellow. Once we have those die cut out, I'm going to take some more of that, well, not yet. Actually, what we're going to do is, I have a thought bubble in my stash that will fit the sentiment that says "you're hot" and then "you're sweet." I thought it'd be cute if both of these coffee cups were talking to each other. So we're going to stamp those with some VersaFine Onyx Black ink. And I wanted the thought bubbles to be facing opposite directions. So this one's going to die cut here, but to get the other one to die cut the other way, I'm going to flip my panel around. I'm going to hold it up to the light so I can center it, and then I'll tape it down and die cut it. That way when I die cut it out, they're both in opposite directions. I think it just looks better on a card. Now I'm going to go in with some more of that stripe pattern paper. It's black and white striped, and using a heart die, I'm going to cut out a heart with it, and that's going to be a background for my coffee cups. Okay, I also cut out a white panel. The size of this panel here is 3.5 inches by 4 3/4, and then the brown one that's going to fit right behind it is 3 3/4 inches by 5. I just matted them together. Now we're going to arrange our little coffee cups. I did add foam squares behind it so they'll be popped up. And then hindsight, I decided to add the little steam swirls, so I'm going to stamp them with some VersaFine Onyx Black ink on that heart. I wanted them to stand out, and I thought the VersaFine would work great. Now as I did this, I was stamping directly on my coffee cups, and you can see I actually got ink on both of my coffee cups. So I was trying to figure out a way to where I could fix this. I thought about covering it with the thought bubble. It didn't look right, and then I thought, well, maybe I'll use my sand eraser, and that wasn't working right. So I thought it would be fun. Well, let's trim this down real fast. My mind was still thinking, how am I going to fix that? So I thought, well, we'll bring in some squiggly eyes. Since coffee cups are talking to each other, we're going to make them happy coffee cups. So I'm just grabbing 4 little wiggly eyes, and I glued them down to my coffee cups. And I did add little happy faces, and then on the girls I add little eyelashes. For a little bit of sparkle, I went in with some pink and yellow sequins, and that finishes up my mess up card. Okay, for card number 5, we're going to do some more stamping with the large coffee mug. I'm going to stamp 2 of them. Now I'm going to use that little heart from the stamp set again. I'm just going to grab a piece of Post-it tape and kind of mask off the side so I can overlap my little hearts. I'm going to fill in both coffee cups with the hearts, and then I'm going to color them in with my Copic markers. So I have some real fun little heart coffee cups. Here's a close-up of what they look like. Okay, using that same stripe paper, I'm going to add some black and white stripe to the left side of this panel. Now this panel size is 4 inches by 5 1/4. My die, I got to straighten that up. I really got it crooked. But the stripe paper here is a little over 1.5 inches, and then I did grab a piece of craft cardstock and I cut out a 1/2 inch strip and I placed it over the seam. I'm going to take the largest stitched rectangle die I have and cut out my panel. I just kind of arrange my coffee cups the way I want them to be and then stamp my sentiment. The sentiment I chose says, "We're the perfect blend." I'm just going to flip over my coffee cups and add a little bit of foam squares behind there. I placed my panel on my card base and then popped up my coffee cups, added a few sequins, and then I did use the lacquer pen to fill in the hearts and then the coffee that was in the cups. But this was a quick and easy card, but I like the way it turned out. That finishes off that card. Okay, moving along to card number 6. We're going to do some masking for this card. So I have a piece of Strathmore Bristol Smooth cardstock here. I'm actually going to use my stitched rectangle die as a guide to where to stamp. So I'm just going to tape it down, and then we're going to ink up our coffee cup here, and this is Memento Tuxedo Black ink. After I stamp my image, I'm going to remove the release paper off of my mask and place that right on top. And then we're going to stamp another coffee cup. For the next one, we're going to use the large coffee mug. And you just stamp right on top. And I'm going to repeat the process with every single one of those coffee cups. I just did a few here because I wanted to show you how I did it. But basically, it's the same thing. For this one, it's the to-go coffee cup. Now, when I did stamp this, I took a baby wipe and wiped off the very top line of the to-go cup. I did that because I want to stamp the lid, but I placed the masks all over every single image, and then now we're going to shade in our background. Now I'm going to be using some Stormy Sky Distress Oxide ink, and I just covered the entire background. I did add some water droplets to activate some of that ink and give my texture, my background a little bit of texture. Okay, now this always is so fun. I love removing the mask because of how white it is against your colored background. But I'm going to save those masks because I'm going to use them a couple times in the future videos. Or not videos, but future cards. Okay, well I might use them in future videos, but I'm going to just set those aside. Okay, now I'm going to use that little heart again, and I decided to stamp the heart in the center of each one of my little cups. And then I did go ahead and use my Copic markers and some bright colors to color in all of my coffee cups. Once my coloring is done, there's this little accent for your coffee in the stamp set. I'm going to stamp that a few times over all of my coffee cups. And here's where I took some of those masks again and masked off some areas so I could get that stamp right behind it. Okay, I'm going to take my die and center my little scene. I thought, you know what? We're on a roll with that black and white striped paper. We're going to use some on the very bottom of this panel too. So I just adhered it with my tape runner, and I'll run this entire panel through my die cut machine. Now I went ahead and stamped my sentiment. My sentiment says, "Get stuff done." And then on the very bottom of the striped paper, I took some blue and white baker's twine. It kind of matched the Stormy, is it Stormy Sky, did I say? Yeah, Stormy Sky Distress Oxide ink. I just doubled it up and tied a bow at the very bottom. Now we'll take this panel and flip it over, add some foam tape, and place it on our card base. Now for a little bit of sparkle, oh, I wanted to ground my coffee cups. They were kind of floating. I thought that the striped paper, it would be nice for them to be kind of grounded on that, but it didn't happen that way. So I'm taking my C3 Copic marker and kind of adding a little bit of shadows underneath there. Using the lacquer pen, I'm going to fill in the coffee areas. And then I did use some Nuvo crystal drops. These are white blizzard to fill in the little hearts. And that's it for card number 6. Okay, card number 7. This was a super fancy card, and I love the colors in here. So I'm taking the fancy coffee cup and stamping it on some craft cardstock. I'm also going to use some Memento ink and stamp the straw 2 times. And again, I'm going to turn it into a cookie. I don't think I used it as a straw. I used it mostly as cookies. Okay, we're going to set that aside, and then we're also going to stamp the whipped cream. And there's 2 whipped creams in the stamp set. I'm using the smaller one. It fits this cup beautifully. But I'm going to go ahead and add some white embossing powder, and we're going to go ahead and melt that. Okay, after that's done, I'm going to get ready to color in my coffee. And I decided to take this smile die that I have in my stash. It's from MFT. And I created a sentiment that says smile, but I'm not going to use the eye. I thought it'd be fun to use the coffee cup as the eye. So now I'm going to just do a little bit of coloring. I wanted to create like a frappuccino kind of a fancy coffee. So I'm using some very dark browns. And as I did that, I decided, you know what? I'm going to do the very bottom portion of the smile letters. So starting off with the darkest brown, and then I went in with the second lightest brown, and then worked my way up. Same as I did with the coffee cup. Now I'm going to take the coordinating dies and I'll just cut out my coffee cup. I just didn't do that quite yet, did I? Okay. I decided to add some whip topping to my whip topping that we embossed. Now, I should have die cut it out first and then did this, because I ended up having to fussy cut this out because I didn't want the dimension to smush when you run it through your die cut machine. But it worked out great. But I just added some of that white puffy embossing powder to my whipped cream, and then I did the same thing. I stuck in my little cookies. Glued those together. Okay, now I created a panel here with some craft cardstock. This panel is 3.5 inches by 4 3/4. And I decided to add a little bit of a thank you background. So in the stamp set there's the thank you sentiment. Just using my Versamark ink, I'm going to add some watermark on that craft cardstock. And then I matted it on some dark brown cardstock. And I did again use one of my diagonal striped black and white papers. I just glued it down to my panel and then stuck down my SM and the LE, leaving that gap in the middle for my cappuccino. Frappuccino, cappuccino. Okay, we're going to pop this up with some foam tape, place that on our card base. I'm just going to trim off the excess. Now, I wanted to add a sentiment to that coffee cup. So I did that off camera, but I did stamp and emboss a cup of joy on my coffee cup. I just used white embossing powder for that. And I think that turned out really cute. But I placed my coffee in the middle, and that finishes off that card. Okay, for my next card, we're going to keep this one pretty simple. So I'm going to stamp this coffee cup, and then I'm actually going to use the mask that we had created with our earlier card. I'm just going to trim off the coffee portion of it on the very top, and then I'm going to lay that over my coffee cup. And then in my stash I have a long stem flower. Any kind of long stem flower that you can find in your stamp set will work beautifully for this card. But I found one that had a little daisy on it. So I'm going to stamp that with some Memento ink. And then I'll go ahead and color in my coffee mug and my flower. And then I did add some of that white puff embossing powder on the inside of my mug. It created a really neat 3D effect, and I thought it'd make some fun dirt. So I used my brown Copic marker and went over the top of it, and I really like the way that turned out. So you can actually color in the white puff. I'm going to mat this on some diagonal stripe pattern paper. I'm going to pop up this panel with foam tape, and I'll adhere that to my stripe paper. And then once we have that centered, that's the fun thing about these coffee cups too, is I used a black marker and colored in some texture on my coffee cup. I put some black and white checkers on there. But I'm going to adhere this to my card base. And then I'm going to take my lacquer pen and just fill in the center of my flower. And that, oh, I did stamp the sentiment also. Thanks a whole latte. And that finishes off card number 8. Now for card number 9, we are going to stamp this coffee cup 4 times. And I'm going to color them in with my Copic markers with some bright colors. I chose a green, a pink, a yellow, and a purple. Now I'll just take the coordinating dies and then I'll cut out each one of the coffee cups. I love these dies because the handles and each one of them actually cut out. It's not a solid white. It actually cuts out that centerpiece, and I appreciate that and I like it. But I have some baker's twine that coordinate with each one of my colors, and I'm actually going to loop my baker's twine through the handles on each of the coordinating coffee cups. Now next I have a panel that's 3 inches by 4 1/4. I'm going to add some foam squares behind each one of my mugs, and then I'm going to arrange them on my panel as if they're hanging down from it. So I'm just playing around with the placement, and I did leave a little bit of room on the bottom right for my sentiment. I just used tape to secure my baker's twine behind it. And now we're going to mat that. Oh no, we're going to stamp our sentiment. I chose the sentiment that says coffee is always a good idea. Using VersaFine Onyx Black ink, I'm going to stamp that. And then we'll mat this panel on some dark chocolate brown cardstock. So we have a little bit of a brown border. Next we'll add some foam tape behind here. We're going to add a little bit of dimension, place that on our card base, and then for a little bit of shine I'm going to go over the coffee with my lacquer pen. Now here's where I thought, well, it'd be fun if the coffee was kind of dripping out of each one of those cups, but I didn't want it to be clear and I didn't want it to ruin the card. I didn't want to take the chance of it ruining it, but that would be fun if it was kind of dripping out of the coffee cups. But that's it for card 9. Now for my final card, I'm going to use some Distress Oxide ink. This is Tattered Rose, and I'm going to take the, I guess, a bird's eye view coffee cup, and I stamped it all over a piece of Canson XL watercolor cardstock. And then I also stamped one, single one, on another piece. Now I'm just going to take my water brush, and I'm going to shade in the plate portion of this cup here. I'm actually going to grab a little bit more Tattered Rose, so it's just a little bit more intense shading. And I colored that entire background panel. This card was a bit different, but I think it turned out really neat. Okay, once the coloring's done, I decided to take some espresso distress ink, or yeah, I believe it's espresso, but there's 3 little decorative foam elements for your coffee cups in the stamp set. So I'm just using the heart for this one here, and then using my water brush I'm going to blend that color out. And it didn't turn out neat. Actually the color kind of faded into the Tattered Rose, but I liked it. I don't know what it was about it, but I just liked the way this turned out. But there's that one, and then I'm going to end up using the other 2 coffee elements and stamp those on the center of each of these and do the same exact thing. So the only one that has the heart is the single one. Now I went ahead and used the coordinating die to cut that out, and I also cut out a window in this panel here, and then used the stitched rectangle to create my frame. Now I cut out 2 little paper napkins. I'm going to call them that, with a square die that has stitching on it. I thought it'd be cute if the coffee cup was sitting underneath some napkins. I'm going to add foam tape behind my window panel here, and then we're going to place that on a chocolate brown card base. I'm going to actually tuck my napkins underneath my coffee cup and place that right in the center. Now as I finished I thought, oh, we need a sentiment, so I went through my pattern paper stash and I found this here. I thought this would be a cute little, like a guest check. So I'm going to kind of curl up the edges a little bit and then add a little bit of distress ink on the edges. And then I decided to stamp the sentiment on my little guest check. This one says, "Take a break." I'll just stamp that, and then I'm going to tuck that right underneath my napkins and my coffee cup. I think that turned out a little bit different, but I think it turned out fun. I didn't want to add any bells and whistles with this. I just wanted to keep it as it was. Kind of looks a little bit organic, I guess you could say. But that's card 10. So here's a look at all 10 cards I made today with the My Monthly Hero August 2018 card kit. I hope this gives you some different ideas on how to use the kit. And like I said, the kits are still available. I just checked, which is a surprise for me. But links will be in the description area in case you're interested. But these are super duper fun, and if you need coffee cups in your stash, I think this is great because it does come with the coordinating dies. A lot of versatility, I think, in this stamp set. But here's all 10 cards. My little organic one, and then my little flower one. That one was still wet, so I didn't want to put that underneath, but I love hearing your comments. Let me know what you think, and if you're new and want to see more, hit that subscribe button, guys. I wish you a fantastic day, and we will see you again real soon. Bye-bye.